Awesome. All right, hey guys. So here it goes. On November 19, 2014, Rolling Stone published an article entitled "A Rape on Campus." This is a slide that shows a very small sample of every tweet and post made pertaining to the article. It's a lot to take in, and if I had to ask you to read it, it'd probably take you, 3-4 hours, and the question you would ask then is, why would anyone actually read this? The thing is that we already do read this, and it's already on our social media, and we've already read the same sort of content. We actually spend a staggering 10 hours a day on social media reading content from our friends and other news articles, but the grand irony in all of this is that we actually remember very little. So if I had to ask you the question, can you remember 3 things that you've read on social media today? You probably couldn't do it. The good thing is that you're not alone, or maybe that's not a good thing. We've taken so much information that it's actually not getting retained. We fail to distinguish between what information is important and what's not. And when we don't make this distinction, we tend to default to think that everything's important. This is a flaw because once we think everything important, then nothing is. On the flip side, let's actually think of how we also produce information. We're thinkers, doers, change agents, and scholars of the university, and upon graduation, we'll have our own messages to share and ideas to spread. But how can we actually guarantee that our messages will stick, how they will break through the clutter and parse out all the noise around it? And this is the sort of problem that I've been thinking about for the past few years. I'm actually a data scientist and a graphic designer, and what I've become used to doing is synthesizing a lot of information and putting it to a medium where that medium has to transcend my voice and my words. It has to stand alone and be powerful on its own. And in my past few years of doing this, I've actually learned that there's a few rules of how we visually perceive information from a cognitive perspective. And these rules are super simple. The first one is that we tend to be drawn to contrast, not similarity. So this diagram that you see behind me is essentially a diagram of 5 lines. We're immediately drawn to the red line and not the gray ones. There's actually very small distinctions between the gray lines, but we don't pick up on it. We tend to have questions like, what is this red line? What does it represent? And how is it different from the others? Contrast is beautiful because it naturally demands our attention without forcing us to look at it. The second rule is that we tend to be drawn to familiar patterns of representation. And what the diagram here is 2 simple lines, a red line and a black line. We don't really know what they represent. It could be an X chromosome, it could be a social commentary. And what happens here is that we actually don't seem to know the difference between them when we're not given visual cues. So as soon as I flash up this, which is 2 axes, we tend to see very different things here. We're triggered to see patterns that we wouldn't see otherwise. We tend to ask, what's the independent variable and what's the dependent one? Why does the black line seem to be ascending faster than the red one? These sorts of questions are only asked once we actually see these very simple but powerful visual cues here. And so with these 2 rules of information design and how we actually visually perceive information, there are 3 distinct ways of how we can actually leverage and capitalize on these rules. The first one is form, the second is color, and the third is position. And with these 3 sorts of things, we can juxtapose objects to make them look different and create contrast and also create familiarity with them. I want to show you guys one of my favorite visualizations. This is a graph on how fast America tends to change its minds on key social issues. And there are 5 social issues here represented by 5 distinct lines. They range from interracial marriage to prohibition to same-sex marriage. And the beauty of these 3 unified visual attributes come across in this graph. We can immediately notice contrast between key social issues. For example, it took us a hell of a long time to figure out that alcohol wasn't that bad of a thing in prohibition. And it also took us far less amount of time to realize the same about gay marriage. And so we're left with questions, why does this social dynamic actually exist? And that's the beautiful paradox of information design. We're given a lot of information, yes, it's very complex, but we're also given the seed of curiosity to find out more about what underlies this graph. So I want to go back to the very first slide that we actually showed the presentation. I want to explain how we can actually make ideas that we spread more powerful. And the very first slide, again, is a simple slide that shows every post and tweet made pertaining to the Rape on Campus article. And I just revisualized it a bit. What you now see here from left to right is the partisanship of the tweets that we actually say. On the left-hand side, we see tweets more associated with tweets that mention hashtag UVA rape hoax. And on the right side, we see tweets more often associated with hashtag I stand with Jackie. We can actually start to parse out the truth between these things once we actually think about the rules of information design. And so as I emphasize these 4 words on the left and these 4 words on the right, I want you to read them and take them in. On the left, we see rape, harm, joke, and idiot. And on the right-hand side, we see something arguably more meaningful. We see Jackie, believe, victims, and survivors. To finally close out this talk, I want to recite a quote from T.S. Eliot from one of his lesser-known poems, which goes, "Where is the life we have lost in living? Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? And where is the knowledge we have lost in information?" We definitely live in an information age, but we don't have to be lost in it. So let's use information design to find our way back. Thanks.